Hello everyone, this is the 5th Epical Revelation Fellowship. I'm Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and today is October 27th, 2013, and today we're going to study paper 123, The Early Childhood of Jesus, and that starts on page 1355 in the original Urantia book, or it's on paper 123-1. So let me say a little prayer and we'll get started. Lord, thank you for bringing us together, and thank you for this opportunity to worship you and learn these things you have for us, to learn this wonderful revelation. We pray that you'll bless all of our lives and bless our families and watch over us. We pray that you'll open our hearts and our minds that we might learn something today and benefit from this time together. We say this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Okay, paper 123. Let's get started. Let me advance this. I guess I can turn this on. Might help. The early childhood of Jesus. You want to start out reading, and I'll take the next one.
Owing to the uncertainties and anxieties of their sojourn in Bethlehem, Mary did not wean the babe until they had arrived safely in Alexandria, where the family was able to settle down to a normal life. They lived with kinsfolk, and Joseph was well able to support his family as he secured work shortly after their arrival. He was employed as a carpenter for several months and then elevated to the position of foreman of a large group of workmen employed on one of the public buildings then in process of construction. This new experience gave him the idea of becoming a contractor and builder after their return to Nazareth.
Okay, so he worked basically as a carpenter in Alexandria, and then that gave him the idea to become a contractor, right, later on. So this really was a benefit to Joseph and his family because it gave him the idea to go on and make better of himself, didn't it? So it's a good thing, very good thing. There's a picture of Jesus and Mary and Joseph in the background here. I got lots of pictures today. I thought it was interesting.
What do you think the significance is of what it says here about Mary not weaning him until they arrived in Alexandria?
Because of their uncertainty of travel and things, and she probably wasn't sure that she could find things available to feed the baby. So that's probably why she waited a little bit later to wean him, because when they got somewhere and they were settled, then of course they had availability to nuts and fruits and things like that, which if they're when they were on the road or moving around a lot, they wouldn't have that. So she would want him to have the availability of mother's milk, don't you think? So I think that's what they did. Okay. All through these early years of Jesus' helpless infancy, Mary maintained one long and constant vigil, lest anything befall her child which might jeopardize his welfare, or in any way interfere with his future mission on earth. No mother was ever more devoted to her child. In the home where Jesus chanced to be, there were 2 other children about his age among the near neighbors. There were 6 others whose ages were sufficiently near his own to make them acceptable playfellows. At first Mary was disposed to keep Jesus close by her side. She feared something might happen to him if he were allowed to play in the garden with the other children, but Joseph, with assistance of his kinfolk, was able to convince her that such a course would deprive Jesus of the helpful experience of learning how to adjust himself to children of his own age. And Mary, realizing that such a program of undue sheltering and unusual protection might tend to make him self-conscious and somewhat self-centered, finally gave assist to the plan of permitting the child of promise to grow up just like any other child. And though she was obedient to this decision, she made it her business always to be on watch while the little folks were at play about the house or in the garden. Only an affectionate mother could know the burden that Mary carried in her heart for the safety of her son during those early years of his infancy and early childhood. And you can imagine, there's a picture of Joseph, Mary again. You can imagine knowing that your child was supposed to be the promised spiritual leader of the world, how upset she must have been. That's the last one. And she was overprotective of him, wasn't she? And you can imagine how they reacted in the super universe to this, because Jesus was supposed to live a normal life like any other child.
Right.
So if he was overprotected, that wouldn't be along the line of what was supposed to happen, would it?
Right.
So.
And what does that tell us about the way that we raise our children?
Yeah.
It's not good for them.
No, they have to learn their own lessons, don't they? You can't overprotect, as much as you'd like to, you can't overprotect your children.
You have to teach them to be wise and equip them to make good decisions, but you can't shelter them from everything.
No, you can't. All right. You want to take the next one?
Throughout the 2 years of their sojourn at Alexandria, Jesus enjoyed good health and continued to grow normally. Aside from a few friends and relatives, no one was told about Jesus as being a child of promise. One of Joseph's relatives revealed this to a few friends in Memphis, descendants of the distant Akhenaten, and they, with a small group of Alexandrian believers, assembled at the palatial home of Joseph's relative benefactor a short time before the return to Palestine to wish the Nazareth family well and to pay their respects to the child. On this occasion, the assembled friends presented Jesus with a complete copy of the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, but this copy of Jewish sacred writings was not placed in Joseph's hands until both he and Mary had finally declined the invitation of their Memphis and Alexandrian friends to remain in Egypt. These believers insisted that the child of destiny would be able to exert a far greater world influence as a resident of Alexandria than of any designated place in Palestine. These persuasions delayed their departure for Palestine for some time after they received the news of Herod's death.
So the people of Memphis and Alexandria wanted them to stay, didn't they? Because they wanted to help raise Jesus into this leader, right? Kind of mold his existence, as they did. But that didn't work out either. And another interesting thing in this paragraph is it mentions here the descendants of the distant Akhenaten. Remember who Akhenaten was?
Oh yes, I do.
Okay,
I
and
know who he is.
yeah, and he was benefited from the Melchizedek teachings, right? Okay.
So what does this tell us about Palestine? Essentially what they're saying here is that, we are, far more advanced in, religious teachings and understandings. It would be much better off for you to stay here than to go back to Palestine.
Yeah, he'd learn more and grow up more of a spiritual leader, right? Yeah.
So that tells us that there's probably another reason that he needed to be in Palestine.
Yeah,
to
get a more normal upbringing. It's kind of interesting if you think about these bestowals that all the Creator sons do. When they are incarnated in children like this, it's the only way they can experience the normal upbringing of everyday children. And if they're number one, over taught or they put too much emphasis on their future lives, then they don't get to experience that, do they?
Right. No.
So it kind of short circuits the purpose of the bestowal, if you think about it.
I also think that part of the purpose of this is that he be in Palestine amongst the Jews who were going to reject him.
Yeah. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Okay, Joseph and Mary finally took leave of Alexandria on a boat belonging to their friend Ezrion, bound for Joppa, arriving at the port late in August of the year 4 BC. They went directly to Bethlehem, where they spent the entire month of September in council with their friends and relatives concerning whether they should remain there or return to Nazareth. And this is a picture of this trip. So if we look here, let's see if I get the pointer. This is Alexandria, right? This is Bethlehem. So they left Bethlehem stayed over here in Alexandria, right, by boat, and then they went back to Joppa, and then walked back down to Bethlehem. Okay? Picture.
So Jesus is 3.
He's 3 here. Yep. That's right. Okay. To the next one. All right, you take the next one.
Mary had never fully given up the idea that Jesus ought to grow up in Bethlehem, the city of David. Joseph did not really believe that their son was to become a kingly deliverer of Israel. Besides, he knew that he himself was not really a descendant of David, that his being reckoned among the offspring of David was due to the adoption of one of his ancestors into the Davidic line of descent. Mary, of course, thought the city of David the most appropriate place in which the new candidate for David's throne could be reared. But Joseph preferred to take chances with Herod Antipas rather than with his brother Archelaus. He entertained great fears for the child's safety in Bethlehem or in any other city in Judea, and surmised that Archelaus would be more likely to pursue menacing policies of his father Herod than would Antipas in Galilee, and besides all these reasons, Joseph was outspoken in his preference for Galilee as a better place in which to rear and educate the child, but it required 3 weeks to overcome Mary's objections.
So Mary kept trying to push him into this Davidic line, didn't she? And she tried to make him this Jewish leader, right? And Joseph was more along letting him raise the child as a normal child, right? Believed his mission would be one of a more spiritual mission, right? Okay.
And away from Judea and Jerusalem and the teachings of the rabbis.
That's right. So there's a, Joseph had a good idea keeping his son in Palestine, didn't he? Okay. The other thing is here, it mentions here that Joseph was not really a direct descendant of David. You know, all these charts that show that Jesus is a direct descendant of David is not really correct, because Joseph's relatives were adopted by someone who was in the descendancy of David. So he was counted among the descendancy of David. It's funny how these things we think are important are not really that important. You know, but they try to do that. Why? Because they want to keep it along the line of the Jewish teachings, right? That this Messiah would come from the line of David, right? Okay.
Is it my turn?
No, I guess it's my turn.
Yeah.
By the 1st of October, Joseph had convinced Mary and all their friends that it would be best for them to return to Nazareth. Accordingly, in early 4 BC, they departed from Bethlehem for Nazareth, going by way of Lydda and Scythopolis. Okay? They started out early one Sunday morning, Mary and the child riding on their newly acquired beast of burden, while Joseph and 5 accompanying kinsmen proceeded on foot. Joseph's relative refused to permit them to make the trip to Nazareth alone. They feared to go to Galilee by Jerusalem in the Jordan Valley, and the western routes were not altogether safe for 2 lone travelers with a child of tender years. They feared to go there, not they preferred. Okay. So they were kind of afraid of being accosted by highwaymen and things, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's why they went that way.
Which is, interesting, an interesting feature of the times they were living in.
Yeah. It was not altogether as peaceful as we would like to think, right? Okay. It's not a fairy tale existence by no stretch of the imagination, right? Okay.
Okay, number 1, back in Nazareth. On the 4th day of the journey, the party reached its destination in safety. They arrived unannounced at the Nazareth home, which had been occupied for more than 3 years by one of Joseph's married brothers, who was indeed surprised to see them. So quietly had they gone about their business that neither the family of Joseph nor that of Mary knew they had even left Alexandria. The next day, Joseph's brother moved his family and Mary, for the first time since Jesus' birth, settled down with her little family to enjoy life in their own home. In less than a week, Joseph secured work as a carpenter, and they were supremely happy.
Okay, so they showed up back at their house that Joseph had built for them, right? And his brother was living there with his family. So they had to move him out to move back into his own house, right? Because they didn't even know where they were. And this is an interesting picture that's from the Encyclopedia Urantia. This is a church that's built on the supposed site of Joseph's and Mary's house.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that kind of neat? Most of us will probably never get a chance to go to Nazareth, but that's, if you go there, that's the supposed site of where his house was.
Wow.
Kind of neat.
I'm sure it didn't look anything near that, like that.
Oh no!
One
not even close.
Right.
All right. Just a little bit. Jesus was about 3 years and 2 months old at the time of their return to Nazareth. He had stood all these travels very well and was in excellent health and full of childish glee, and excitement of having premises of his own to run about in and to enjoy. But he missed the association of his Alexandrian playmates, which would make sense since he was a child and he would want to have people to play with, right?
Sure. On the way to Nazareth, Joseph had persuaded Mary that it would be unwise to spread the word among their Galilean friends and relatives that Jesus was a child of promise. They agreed to refrain from all mention of these matters to anyone, and they were both very faithful in keeping this promise.
Okay, so they didn't tell anybody that Jesus was a child of promise. This is right outside of Nazareth as you're coming into Nazareth. That was interesting. It's always nice to see the a herd of sheep and the mountainous areas around. Okay. Okay. Jesus' entire 4th year was a period of normal physical development and of unusual mental activity. Meantime, he had formed a very close attachment for a neighbor boy about his own age named Jacob. Jesus and Jacob were always happy in their play, and they grew up to be great friends and loyal companions. Okay, and Jacob was the son of the stonemason. Remember that?
Yep.
And Jacob was the one that always took up for Jesus because Jesus wouldn't defend himself, right? Yep. And Jacob was also he married one of Jesus's sisters.
He did?
Yeah.
Who did he marry? Miriam?
Miriam, I think. I'm not sure about that, but yeah, one of his sisters he married.
No, I have forgotten about that.
Maybe it was Ruth.
Ruth married David Zebedee.
Oh, that's right. She did.
She married Zebedee.
But it was one of his sisters. I know that married. I think it was his oldest sister.
I would have been Miriam.
I think it was Miriam. We'll read about it here shortly. So, but this is the same Jacob that he grew up with.
It's interesting that Jacob is his defender.
Yeah.
I guess it makes me think about the Old Testament God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just interesting. I don't know what the parallel there is. But.
Yeah, it is interesting too that this young child that was buddies with him takes the role because of their friendship to become his defender for his whole life.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting too. The next important event in the life of the Nazareth family was the birth of the second child, James, in the early morning hours of April 2, 3 BC. Jesus was thrilled by the thought of having a baby brother, and he would stand around by the hour just to observe the baby's early activities, like all children do, right?
So they were 4 years apart.
Yeah.
It was midsummer this same year that Joseph built a small workshop close to the village and near the caravan tarrying lot. After this, he did very little carpenter work by the day. He had as associates 2 of his brothers and several other mechanics whom he sent out to work while he remained at the shop, making yokes and plows and doing other woodwork. He also did some work in leather and with rope and canvas. And Jesus, as he grew up, when not in school, spent his time about equally between helping his mother with home duties and watching his father work at the shop, meanwhile listening to the conversations and gossip of the caravan conductors and passengers from the four corners of the earth.
So his little shop became a very busy little hub for people to come and go, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's where this picture down here came from. It's supposed to be Jesus working on a yoke.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's what that's about. Okay.
So he got to hear about
News from all over the
the
world.
four corners of the earth.
That's right. In July of this year, 1 month before Jesus was 4 years old, an outbreak of malignant intestinal trouble spread over all Nazareth from contact with the caravan travelers. Mary became so alarmed by the danger of Jesus being exposed to this epidemic of disease that she bundled up both her children and fled to the country home of her brother several miles south of Nazareth on the Megiddo Road near Sarad.
Sarah?
They did not return to Nazareth for more than 2 months. Jesus greatly enjoyed this first experience on the farm. And that's what this picture is about right here. This is Mary's brother. So they went from Nazareth down to her brother's. This is later on in this paper, the fishing, his uncle fishing's business that they went and visited too. Okay? And that's in this lines. All right.
Okay, 2, the 5th year, 2 BC. In something more than a year after the return to Nazareth, the boy Jesus arrived at the age of his...
Here we go. I'm sorry.
In something more than a year after the return to Nazareth, the boy Jesus arrived at the age of his first personal and wholehearted moral decision. And there came to abide with him a thought adjuster, a divine gift of the Paradise Father, which had aforetime served with Maccabean to Melchizedek, thus gaining the experience of functioning in connection with the incarnation of a supermortal being living in the likeness of mortal flesh. This event occurred on February 11th, 2 BC. Jesus was no more aware of the coming of the divine monitor than are the millions upon millions of other children who, before and since that day, have likewise received these thought adjusters to indwell their minds and work for the ultimate spiritualization of these minds and the eternal survival of their evolving mortal souls.
Isn't it interesting that they recorded the exact day
Exact
that
day,
his thought adjuster arrived?
February 11th.
So just like all other children, until this time, he was in the care of his mother, wasn't he? And the guardian angels, until that thought adjuster arrived. Okay. Which I find, that's always interesting to me, this arrival of the thought adjuster. And for you at home that don't know what a thought adjuster is, this is a father fragment. Let's give it to you. Okay. On this day in February, the direct and personal supervision of the universal rulers as it was related to the integrity of the childlike incarnation of Michael terminated. Okay, so when the thought adjuster arrived, their responsibility terminated, right? From that time on, throughout the human unfolding of the incarnation, the guardianship of Jesus was destined to rest in the keeping of this indwelling adjuster and the associated seraphic guardians, supplemented from time to time by the ministry of midway creatures assigned for the performance of certain definite duties in accordance with the instruction of the planetary supervisors. So he did have midwayers assigned to him that was responsible for his watchkin too, right? Okay.
So, you know, all this time that Mary was trying to be an overprotective mother, she had no idea
No.
that he was being
watched
by the
that's
universe rulers.
That's right.
Jesus was 5 years old in August of this year, and we will therefore refer to this as his 5th calendar year of life. In this year 2 BC, a little more than 1 month before his 5th birthday anniversary, Jesus was made very happy by the coming of his sister Miriam, who was born on the night of July 11th. During the evening of the following day, Jesus had a long talk with his Father concerning the manner in which various groups of living things are born into the world as separate individuals. The most valuable part of Jesus' early education was secured from his parents in answer to his thoughtful and searching inquiries. Joseph never failed to do his full duty in taking pains and spending time answering the boy's numerous questions. From the time Jesus was 5 years old until he was 10, he was one continuous question mark. While Joseph and Mary could not always answer his questions, they never failed fully to discuss his inquiries and in every other way possible to assist him in his efforts to reach a satisfactory solution of the problem which his alert mind has suggested.
Okay, so just like every other kid, he was nothing but questions, right?
Inquisitive.
Inquisitive all the time.
So it's just it's interesting. You know, the thought adjuster arrives on February 11th, and Miriam is born on July 11th. So it's another 11. I don't know. That's
just a coincidence.
I guess.
Yeah. All right. Since returning to Nazareth, theirs had been a busy household, and Joseph had been unusually occupied building his new shop and getting his business started again. Now keep in mind, the shop is right next to the house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fully he was occupied that he had found no time to build a cradle for James. But this was corrected long before Miriam came, so that she had a very comfortable crib in which to nestle while the family admired her. And the child Jesus heartily entered into all these natural and normal home experiences. He greatly enjoyed his little brother and his baby sister, and was a great help to Mary in their care. So he was just like every other child, wasn't he? In his early life. Watching the baby and helping out with things, right?
Yeah. It's interesting when the girl comes along, you made sure that she had a proper cradle.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, proper cradle. Can't. It's all right with the boys, but the girl has
They had to tough it out.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, you want to take this next slide?
Yeah. There were few homes in the Gentile world of those days that could give a child a better intellectual, moral, and religious training than the Jewish homes of Galilee. These Jews had a systematic program for rearing and educating their children. They divided a child's life into 7 stages. Number 1, the newborn child, the 1st to the 8th day. 2, the suckling child. 3, the weaned child. 4, the period of dependence on the mother, lasting up to the end of the 5th year. 5, the beginning independence of the child, and with sons, the father assuming responsibility for their education.
That's right after the 5th year, right?
6, the adolescent youths and maidens. 7, the young men and the young women.
Now this is the Jewish process of breaking up the life of their children, right?
So it's very interesting that the father assumes responsibility for the sons after age 5.
After age 5, they start.
Right.
The men and the women are separated, right? And that's pretty much still the case today, aren't they? Over there, in the Jewish religion, even with the Islams, they separate the male and the females very early on in life, and they stay that way. And that's why even in church they're separated, right? They're still separated as adults. Okay.
I guess I think that our men would benefit from having the attention of their fathers from the age 5. Not that they need to be separated.
No, but they need that attention, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
The father to focus on the son.
Let's face it, many fathers today don't take any responsibility for their kids at all.
Right.
Which is wrong any way you look at it. And the bad part about that is this in this book. When you call God the universal Father, Americans in particularly lose the benefit of why they call him the universal father, because they never had a father relationship to start out with, you know, which is a pity. It really is. I would have that same problem. And so
fathers are supposed to model the relationship with
they are.
God.
They're supposed to teach you, you know, and that's where that association with the universal father comes from, right?
Yep.
It was the custom of the Galilean Jews for the mother to bear the... We didn't, did we?
No, you're in the right place.
Okay. It was the custom of the Galilean Jews for the mother to bear the responsibility of a child's training to the 5th birthday. And then, if the child were a boy, to hold the father responsible for the lad's education from that time on. This year, therefore, Jesus entered upon the 5th stage of Galilean's Jewish child's career. And according on August 21st, which is his birthday, 2 BC, he formally turned him over to Joseph for further instruction. Okay, and this is a picture of Galilee. Okay, and there's the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look out here, this may be the precipice they were talking about, going from the temple, and they were going to throw Jesus off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought that was interesting. This is the
Mhm.
road coming to Galilee, which as today, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Oops.
Though Joseph was now assuming the direct responsibility for Jesus' intellectual and religious education, so intellectual and religious, the father is responsible for.
Yes.
His mother still interested herself in his home training. She taught him how to know and care for the vines and flowers growing about the garden walls, which completely surrounded the home plot. She also provided on the roof of the house, the summer bedroom, shallow boxes of sand in which Jesus worked out maps and did much of his early practice at writing Aramaic, Greek, and later on Hebrew. For in time he learned to read, write, and speak fluently all 3 languages.
Okay, so he learned Aramaic, Greek, and Hebrew when he was very young. Okay, but it mentions here that Mary taught Jesus how to do what? Raise flowers, right?
Yep.
And this is some of the flowers that grow in Galilee. I thought it would be interesting to see some of the different types of flowers that grow around Galilee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Kind of interesting
Mm-hmm.
to see what he actually might have grown up growing, you know, with his mother. Okay. Let's see here. Jesus appeared to be a well-nigh perfect child physically and continued to make normal progress mentally and emotionally. He experienced a mild digestive upset, his first minor illness, in the latter part of this, his 5th calendar year. So even Jesus had to deal with these problems with physical illness, just like we do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't get out of it either. He
Mhm.
had to deal with some of the bugs from what? The problems left by the life force, by the
Right. 'Cause we
life
don't have
implantation.
proper immune systems.
That's right. Even he had to deal with it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Though Joseph and Mary often talked about the future of their eldest child, had you been there, you would only have observed the growing up of a normal, healthy, carefree, but exceedingly inquisitive child of that time and place.
Okay, so he had a pretty much normal upbringing, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the 6th year, 1 BC. The events of the 6th year, 1 BC. Already with his mother's health, Jesus had mastered the Galilean dialect of the Aramaic tongue, and now his father began teaching him Greek. Mary spoke little Greek, but Joseph was a fluent speaker of both Aramaic and Greek. The textbook for the study of the Greek language was a copy of the Hebrew Scriptures, a complete version of the Law and the Prophets, including the Psalms, which had been presented to them upon leaving Egypt. There were only 2 complete copies of the Scriptures in Greek, and all Nazareth, and the possession of one of them by the carpenter's family made Joseph's home a much sought place and enabled Jesus as he grew up to meet an almost endless procession of earnest students and sincere truth seekers. Before this year ended, Jesus had assumed custody of this priceless manuscript, having been told on his 6th birthday that the sacred book had been presented to him by Alexandrian friends and relatives, and in a very short time he could read it readily. Now we don't really appreciate this today because we have such access to the written words, right? Back then, nobody had books, did they? The only books there were was what was in the temple, right? So
Nor could people read.
nor could people read, and if you could read, you had to do what? You had to go to the temple to read it, right? And having this in his home was a great benefit to him. There's another picture of Jesus and his mother, little angel in the background. Okay, and so that made the location of their home very popular for anybody that came in town and wanted to discover what was in the scriptures, right?
It's interesting that they say here, to meet an almost endless procession of earnest students and truth seekers.
Yeah.
People who wanted to learn about God.
People that want to learn about God. And we take it for granted, don't we? We have all this access to information on the internet and everywhere else, and what we spend our time looking at videos about dogs that, you know, or cats that are, you know.
Yeah, not nonsense.
Nonsense. That's right. The first great shock of Jesus' young life occurred when he was not quite 6 years old. It is seen to the lad that his father, at least his father and mother together, knew everything. Imagine therefore the surprise of this inquiring child when he asked his father, the cause of a mild earthquake which had just occurred, to hear Joseph say, "My son, I really do not know." Thus began that long and disconcerting disillusionment, in the course of which Jesus found out that his earthly parents were not all wise and all knowing. So Jesus, just like every child, thinks his dad knows everything, right? And it was a great shock to him to find out, well, Dad doesn't know everything, right? It's not the same as your Father in heaven. Okay. And this is a picture of Jesus working in the shop with his father Joseph. Okay. Somebody's interpretation of that, I should say.
He's got the little halo around his head.
Little halo around his
Yeah.
head, right? All right.
Okay.
All right.
Joseph's first thought was to tell Jesus that the earthquake had been caused by God, but a moment's reflection admonished him that such an answer would immediately be provocative of further and still more embarrassing inquiries. Even at an early age, it was difficult to answer Jesus' questions about physical or social phenomena by thoughtlessly telling him that either God or the devil was responsible.
That's what we do today, don't we?
Right.
Devil made me do it.
Right. Well, it's interesting because when we have, a hurricane or a tornado or something, we call them acts of God.
Acts of God. And they have
Right.
nothing to do with that, don't
It's
they?
an act of God.
That's right.
At an early age, it was difficult to answer Jesus' questions about physical or social phenomena by thoughtlessly telling him that either God or the devil was responsible. In harmony with the prevailing belief of the Jewish people, Jesus was long willing to accept the doctrine of good spirits and evil spirits as the possible explanation of mental and physical phenomenon, but he very early became doubtful that such unseen influences were responsible for the physical happenings of the natural world.
Now, isn't that the normal thing for a child? You notice here how children are taught to know these things? It's too bad, because just like this concept, which we're going to study this afternoon, or a little bit, about the atonement, we are taught the atonement concept, aren't we? From a very early age. And when we're taught that from a very early age, what's the first thing a child would think? Why would my Father in heaven want to require his son to be a sacrifice for someone else's sin? Right? That's the first question that comes up. Okay? Which is kind of interesting. All right. Okay. Before Jesus was 6 years of age, an early summer of 1 BC, Zacharias and Elizabeth and their son John came to visit Nazareth family. Jesus and John had a happy time during this, their first visit within their memories. Although the visitors could remain only a few days, the parents talked over many things, including the future plans of their sons. While they were thus engaged, the lads played with blocks and sand on top of the house, and many other ways enjoyed themselves in true boyish fashions. So Jesus and John the Baptist played as children, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of interesting too. All right.
Having met John, who came from near Jerusalem, Jesus began to evince an unusual interest in the history of Israel and to inquire in great detail as to the meaning of the Sabbath rites, the synagogue sermons, and the recurring feasts of commemoration. His father explained to him the meaning of all these seasons. The first was the midwinter festive illumination lasting 8 days, starting out with 1 candle on the first night and adding each successive night. This commemorated the dedication of the temple after the restoration of the Mosaic services by Judas Maccabee. So that's Hanukkah.
Yeah, that's kind of Hanukkah.
Next came the early springtime celebration of Purim, the Feast of Esther, and Israel's deliverance through her. Then followed the solemn Passover, which the adults celebrated in Jerusalem whenever possible, while at home the children would remember that no leavened bread was to be eaten for the whole week. Later came the Feast of the First Fruits, the harvest ingathering, and last, the most solemn of all, the Feast of the New Year, the Day of Atonement.
Which is not the same atonement we're talking about for the atonement of...
No,
Okay.
no, we're talking about Yom Kippur here.
That's right.
Not Yom Kippur. While some of these celebrations and observances were difficult for Jesus' young mind to understand, he pondered them seriously and then entered fully into the joy of the Feast of Tabernacles, the annual vacation season of the whole Jewish people, the time when they camped out in leafy booths and gave themselves up to mirth and pleasure.
So that's all the holidays of the Jewish faith, right?
Yep.
Okay. And this is part of that. All right. Not my street. How did I do all right? Okay, I went too far again. All right. During this year, Joseph and Mary had trouble with Jesus about his prayers. He insisted on talking to his heavenly Father much as he would talk to Joseph, his earthly father. This departure from the more solemn and reverent modes of communication with deity was a bit disconcerting to his parents, especially his mother. But there was no persuading him to change. He would say his prayers just as he had been taught, after which he insisted on having just a little talk with my Father in heaven. So he did his own way of communicating with God the Father.
And he talked to God like he talked to his own father.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the way we should talk to whom? Our thought adjusters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you see people walking around talking to yourself, you shouldn't criticize them. They may be talking to God, you know?
In June of this year, Joseph turned the shop in Nazareth over to his brothers and formally entered upon his work as a builder. Before the year was over, the family income had more than trebled. Never again until after Joseph's death did the Nazareth family feel the pinch of poverty. The family grew larger and larger, and they spent much money on extra education and travel, but always Joseph's increasing income kept pace with the growing expenses.
Okay. And this is a map of all the different places that they mention in the book that they visited, Jesus visited as a child. Okay. So they did fairly well until the death of Joseph, didn't they?
Yeah. When Jesus was 15 or 16, did that happen?
No. No, this is in his childhood, these were.
No, I know, but when Joseph died, Jesus was
Oh,
how
he
old?
was
15?
14, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. I could be wrong. It could be 13. I think it was 14. I should remember that kind of stuff. All right. This year, Jesus made great progress.
Wait, I think you skipped one.
Did I?
Yeah, the next few years, Joseph did considerable work at Cana. Is where we are.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I skipped it up here, didn't I? This one. Did we just read that?
It's the next one. It says the next few years.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's 123, 38.
8. Oh,
38.
I'm sorry.
Maybe you
I missed the slide.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and read it because I missed the slide.
Okay. The next few years, Joseph did considerable work at Cana, Bethlehem of Galilee, Magdala, Nain, Sepphoris, Capernaum, and Endor, as well as much building in and near Nazareth. As James grew up to be old enough to help his mother with the housework and care of the younger children, Jesus made frequent trips away from home with his father to these surrounding towns and villages. Jesus was a keen observer and gained much practical knowledge from these trips away from home. He was assiduously storing up knowledge regarding man and the way he lived.
That's this slide. These are the trips he went on.
Right.
Okay, what I did is I probably put the thing in over the slide.
Right.
Have you got a piece of paper?
Do I have paper?
Yeah.
No. No.
Let me write this slide down.
I don't.
I'll write this down so I can correct this in the slides real quick. That's 123.
38.
I'll probably put that map over it. Okay. This year, Jesus made great progress in adjusting his strong feelings and vigorous impulses to the demands of family cooperation and home discipline. Mary was a loving mother, but a fairly strict disciplinarian. In many ways, however, Joseph exerted the greater control over Jesus, as it was his practice to sit down with the boy and fully explain the real and underlying reasons of the necessity of disciplinary curtailment of personal desires in reference to the welfare and tranquility of the entire family. When the situation had been explained to Jesus, he was always intelligently and willingly cooperative with parental wishes and family regulations. And that's what today's fathers ought to do, right?
Absolutely. And he was so young here. He was 6.
Now, this is when Jesus was 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got a little surprise coming up for y'all here.
When boys have the tendency to start to get very rambunctious.
That's right. Okay. You take the next one. Much of his spare time?
Much of his spare time, when his mother did not require his help about the house, was spent studying the flowers and plants by day and the stars by night. He evinced a troublesome penchant for lying on his back and gazing wonderingly up into the starry heavens long after his usual bedtime in this well-ordered Nazareth household.
Of course he did. He created all of them.
It's troublesome, huh?
Yeah.
Troublesome penchant.
Troublesome penchant.
Uh-huh.
Checking out what he had created, right? Of course he didn't know that as a child. Okay. The 7th year, 1 AD. Now this is when Jesus was still 6 years old, right? Or going into 7.
Going on 7.
Yeah, this was indeed an eventful year in the life of Jesus. Early in January, a great snowstorm occurred in Galilee. Snow fell 2 feet deep. That's probably unusual in Galilee.
Yeah.
The heaviest snowfall Jesus saw during his lifetime, one of the deepest in Nazareth in 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Unusual. Now this is what I was holding for y'all. This starts when Jesus is 7 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a calendar of 1 AD.
Mm-hmm.
And I have checked this with some of the dates in the book,
Mhm.
the days and the dates in the book.
Mhm.
And these calendars, I have every calendar for the next 40 years mapped out of Jesus' life. Okay?
Mhm.
So in the slides, as we go through them, as we hit these dates, I'm going to put the calendar up there for each year, 1 AD, 2 AD, 3 AD, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Okay? So if you want to go back and look up a specific day to
Mhm.
see, or date that they talk about, you can see what day it is. Some of them they mention what day it is, and others they don't.
Right.
But if you got the day, you can look up what day it is of the week, just for your own information. Pretty much.
Interesting.
All right, and I've done that for the next 40 years. All right, I have not had time to do the previous ones, BC. All right,
Well, I bet a lot of theologians would find that useful.
they would. You know, you can identify, and it's accurate according to this anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this is the Julian calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so anyway, I thought that might be a useful tool for people to use at home, even. So you can download this in the slides. Which reminds me of something. For you, everyone that's watching at home, you can find all these slides on our website, Fifth Epical Revelation Fellowship, and you can find them under where it says UB Study Slides. There's a whole list. Okay? It's on the main page. Alright? It's the very top of the page, the very first link. Okay. The 7th year, let's see. The play of Jewish life.
The play life of Jewish children in the times of Jesus was rather circumscribed. All too often, the children played at the more serious things they observed their elders doing. They played much at weddings and funerals, ceremonies which they so frequently saw and which were so spectacular. They danced and sang, but had few organized games such as children of later days so much enjoy.
Okay, so they did play, but it was a lot more circumcised than they have it even today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see how that would be the case. Jesus, in company with a neighbor boy, and later his brother James, delighted to play in the far corner of the family carpenter shop, where they had great fun with the shavings and blocks of wood. It was always difficult for Jesus to comprehend the harm of certain sorts of play which were forbidden on the Sabbath. But he never failed to conform to his parents' wishes. He had a capacity for humor and play which was afforded little opportunity for expression in the environment of his day and generation. But up to the age of 14, he was cheerful and light-hearted most of the time. And what happened at 14? He lost his father,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Time to get serious.
Time to get serious. He had the responsibility of the family to take on at that
Well,
time.
it's interesting because somewhere in the book they tell us that I think it's actually later on in the Jesus papers. Jesus says that his people, the Jews, are far too serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, they lack humor.
Mirth and humor, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Mary maintained a dovecote on top of the animal house adjoining the home, and they used the profits from the sale of doves as a special charity fund, which Jesus administered after he deducted the tithe and turned it over to the officer of the synagogue.
And what were these doves used for? Sacrifice.
Sacrifices, right?
Right?
Yeah, for the poor people.
That's right. Okay, the only real accident Jesus had up to this time was to fall down the backyard stone steps, which led to the canvas roof bedroom. It happened during an unexpected July sandstorm from the east. The hot winds carrying blasts of fine sand usually always blew during the rainy season, especially in March and April. It was extraordinary to have such a storm in July. When the storm came up, Jesus was on the housetop playing, and it was his habit for during much of the dry season, this was his accustomed playroom. He was blinded by the sand when descending the stairs and fell. After this accident, Joseph built a balustrade up to both sides of the stairway. So he fell. Now this is interesting what they say about this in the next paragraph.
There was no way in which this accident could have been prevented. It was not chargeable to neglect by the Midway temporal guardians, one primary and one secondary midwayer, having been assigned to the watch care of the lad. Neither was it chargeable to the guardian seraphim. It simply could not have been avoided. But this slight accident, occurring while Joseph was absent in Endor, caused such great anxiety to develop in Mary's mind that she unwisely tried to keep Jesus very close to her side for some months.
Okay, you notice here it says it was not chargeable to neglect by the temporary midway or guardians.
Yep.
So he had one primary, one secondary midwayer that were assigned as his temporal guardians, don't they?
Yep.
Okay. It's just one of those accidents of time that could not be avoided, right? Just like when we have hurricanes and things like that that crop up, are not what? They're not the will of God, right? They're just material accidents because of the natural order of things, right? Okay. Material accidents, commonplace occurrences of a physical nature, are not arbitrarily interfered with by celestial personalities. That's pretty important, isn't it? So normally God doesn't send his celestial personalities to keep these things from happening, does he?
Right.
Under ordinary circumstances, only midway creatures can intervene in material conditions to safeguard the persons of men and women of destiny. And even in special situations, these beings can so act only in the obedience to the specific mandates of the superiors. So they have to have permission to do that, don't they? So even they don't interfere normally. Right. Okay.
And this was but one of a number of such minor accidents which subsequently befell this inquisitive and adventurous youth. If you envisage the average childhood and youth of an aggressive boy, you will have a fairly good idea of the youthful career of Jesus, and you will be able to imagine just about how much anxiety he caused his parents, particularly his mother.
I'm sure that was the case. All right. The fourth member of the Nazareth family, Joseph, was born Wednesday morning, March 16th, 81. Okay? So that's his fourth brother and sister. And I'm going to stop here. We'll take it up from school days and that, or section number 5 next time. Let's have a little prayer and we'll quit for today. You want to pray?
Sure. Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for this revelation that you've given us and the more detailed understanding of the life of Jesus. We just ask you to help us incorporate all of these things into our minds and into our hearts, and help us to understand that they may impact us in our lives and in our service to others. We thank you for all who are listening to this, and we just love you and we praise you, and we ask for your blessing throughout this week. In your Son's name, Jesus Christ Michael, we pray. Amen.
Thank you for joining us. Please come see us again. God bless you.